To welcome our fearless leader of the Transportation Intermediaries Association, Reinke. And it's been a while since we've chatted. I'm glad to have you back on the show. Let's talk a little bit about what the TIA has been doing recently before we get into a little preview of your quarterly report.
Yeah, I like the fact that you said that I was fearless. That's amazing. I fear nothing other than the Papa John's sadness bowls. No, I'm kidding. Those look delicious. I know Michael Vincent.
There's a fine line between bravery and insanity there, Ann. And
you're walking it.
Right? I don't want the Papa John's people after me. Then I will be fearful. They look great. They look terrific. And by the way, congratulations on your FinTech conference yesterday. Not only because I was part of it, but it was a really interesting discussion, I think. I hope you thought it went well.
It absolutely did go pretty well, and every single piece was very, very interesting for me to listen to and to be a part of. And if we missed your chat, it's the good news that people can go to find it on tv.freightwaves.com. It's living on demand there. So thank you for participating in that as well. Let's talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, kind of what the TIA has been up to recently. You guys have had some really good government involvement over the last few months.
Sure. So we've been participating with the FMCSA directly on this guidance about dispatch services. And, you know, the FMCSA is just charged with providing guidance, which you may know it's not necessarily a legal binding resolution. It's literally just guidance on how to proceed where they think this is a best practice. Mm-hmm. What we hear from FMCSA is they're not going to outlaw dispatch services, nor should they, but they may sort of confine what dispatch services can and can't do. We're not entirely sure when that process will be over, but we appreciate the fact that we had that direct communication.
Yeah, so, and the interest in this, explain that to our audience. Why is TIA so interested and involved in the definitions and the recommendations here? What is the gain? What is the loss?
So dispatch services can provide a useful function in that they can be sort of a agent to a carrier to provide back office functions, streamlining payments, doing accounting, that kind of thing. However, there are some cases where dispatchers start intruding into arranging transportation for compensation, which is the definition of a broker. And if they are arranging transportation for compensation, they may be doing it without broker authority, without licensing, without bonding, which could, as you might think, then allow for bad actors to occupy that space because they essentially are operating unregulated.
So, Anne, when we're talking about this topic, there's something that we've been kind of touching on about a lawsuit going on with the C.H. Robinson case, where they have said, does the broker assume responsibility in the situation of an accident? And does that have some kind of bearing on this conversation, too? If you've got these agents that are acting as dispatchers, but they're brokering freight, they can't have that liability come back on them, right? So does that C.H. Robinson case have any bearing on this conversation as well?
Well, I appreciate that sort of thinking about it, because what we find is those dispatch services, A, may be not a deep pocket, B, not have any kind of way to track and trace where they come from, right? Because they may or may not be legitimate. They may or may not actually operate in this country. We have found that some operate overseas. And so if there's some incident that occurs and the plaintiff in the case believes that they will pursue anyone involved in the transaction, and that's how we ended up, getting involved in a case, then how are they going to track down the dispatchers who may or may not have actually been part of what ultimately happened? So that's our concern. The more regulated the traffic, the safer it is.
So is it where does your opinion lie as far as should they be considered and under the same rules, or shouldn't they? And is that like the breeding ground for nefarious double brokering? And I say nefarious double brokering because double brokering in itself is not illegal. And when everybody knows what's going on, it can be a very useful tool. It just opens the door for nefarious activities, quite obviously. Is this one of those breeding grounds?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Right. So double brokering in and of itself is not illegal, but there is illegal double brokering. And if you have an actor in the space who is not regulated and decides to operate as they see fit, then that can open the door to bad action. So, what we've said is that certainly the owner operators tend to rely on dispatchers. So we're not trying to go after owner operators to use dispatchers. If an owner operator uses a dispatcher, what we're saying is the dispatcher should have have a limited sphere over which those owner operators use. So fewer than 5 trucks, for example. And we think that there should not be any money given from the shipper to the dispatcher or the broker to the dispatcher. That should be out of the transaction. And ultimately, if they're operating for one carrier, then that's the carrier that they operate for. They don't operate beyond that if we're talking about a legacy or a large carrier. So what we're trying to do is say, look, we're not getting rid of dispatchers, but just let's have some constraints on how they operate so that they're not actually brokering freight. And if they do want to broker freight, then they should be licensed, bonded, and insured, right?
Right, absolutely. And so let's switch gears a little bit. We just came out of Q2 and TIA getting ready to release their quarterly report coming up in the next few weeks. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek about how the quarter went for you guys and what you're expected to talk about in that report?
Sure. So one thing to note, too, is that we have started using FTR Consulting to put together our market report. For many years, we've been using Noel Perry. As some of you know, he is going to soon enjoy a well-deserved retirement. He's sort of easing into it. So we started contracting with FTR Consulting. We're really excited about the energy that they bring to this discussion. What we found was in a quarter where there is softening in the spot market and the contract market went up, you would typically think, well, that's actually going to hurt the brokers because that's their sphere, right, is the spot market. We actually found that we not only held our own, but we rose to the occasion. And why is that? I think after the 2 years of dislocation, of consumer spending run amok, of the capacity constraints, people see the utility in a broker not just when the times are kind of out of cycle, but when the times are just normalizing, which I think they are, because we do have insights into capacity, because we do have that visibility and transparency into the traffic.
So with that visibility, look into your crystal balls. What's your forecast for the rest of the year? What's your guidance? Are you bullish, bearish, in the middle? What are you thinking?
I feel like I always have to be bullish. That's like part of the job description, but I actually am bullish about it. And part of it too is that yes, consumer spending has adjusted, but and inflation continues to have its impact, but we're not seeing slowdown in the manufacturing sphere. There's still a lot of output in that regard. Imports are perhaps flattening, but exports continue to go great guns. We still think that the economy is going to go not yet into that recession that everyone fears.
Gotcha.
Awesome. And thank you for joining us today. Of course, it's always great to have you on the show. For a little bit of conversation about what the upstream manufacturing world is doing, check out Ken Sherman of IntelliTrans joining us tomorrow on Freightways Now. Awesome. And have a good weekend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Always great to see you. Thank you.